What if I told you that the Bible you grew up with might be missing, say, 15 books? Well, today we're diving into the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. It's a sacred text with a staggering 81 books, which makes it the largest and maybe the most mysterious biblical collection in the entire world.
It sounds like a pretty simple trivia question, doesn't it? But the thing is, the answer isn't just one number. It's actually a puzzle that opens up this deep, fascinating story about history, tradition, and faith.
And you can really see it right here. The differences are pretty significant. So most Protestants work with a 66-book Bible. Catholics have 73. The Eastern Orthodox Church has around 76. But then you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church just towering over all of them with 81 books. That's not a small difference. So the obvious question is, why? What is going on here? What makes their Bible so unique?
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this 81-book anomaly. Together, we're going to explore the history and the unique philosophy that ended up creating the single largest collection of scriptures in all of Christianity.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The whole thing is built on this central puzzle, a kind of paradox. The number of books is always cited as 81, but the actual list of what's inside, well, that can sometimes change.
Let's be absolutely clear on this point. The number 81 is non-negotiable. It's a foundational principle, a cornerstone, within the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. That number is constant, even if the table of contents seems to shift around a bit.
And this slide just shows that paradox perfectly. On the one hand, you've got the official church list, which says 46 Old Testament and 35 New Testament books, but then you might go buy a printed Bible, and the table of contents says 54 and 27. So how do they both equal 81? Well, it's all about how you group them. For example, the official list might count all of Jeremiah's writings as one single book, while the printed version splits them up. It's this fascinating flexibility, but the destination is always the same, 81.
So how in the world did this unique collection even happen? To get it, we really have to go way back to the very foundations of Christianity. See, the Ethiopian canon wasn't just created in a vacuum. It was shaped by centuries of debate and discussion all across the early Christian world.
You have to remember, for hundreds of years after Christ, there was no single, universally agreed upon Bible, not at all. Different bishops, different scholars, different church councils, they all had their own ideas about which gospels and letters and histories were divinely inspired and which ones weren't.
I mean, this table right here gives you a perfect snapshot of the chaos. You had the really influential apostolic canons, which included the books of Clement, but totally left out Revelation. Then the Council of Carthage came along and did the exact opposite. And the famous theologian Gregory Nazianzen, he rejected both of them. It was a messy, decentralized process with no final authority saying, this is it.
And this is where Ethiopia's story takes a really unique turn. Because while the wider church was debating all this stuff, Ethiopia was busy developing its own distinct tradition, bringing in texts and laws that you just don't find anywhere else in the Christian world.
The big turning point really came in the 13th century. It was a document called the Feta Negest, which means Law of the Kings. This text, which drew from even earlier Christian sources, became the legal and religious bedrock for Ethiopia. And it was right here that the 81-book canon was officially written down and established as law. It was a game changer.
So what are these extra books anyway? Well, the Old Testament includes some absolutely incredible texts, like the Book of Enoch, which details this amazing journey through the heavens, and the Book of Jubilees, which retells Genesis and Exodus, but from an angel's perspective. It also has the 3 books of Maccabean. These are Ethiopian stories of martyrs that are completely different from the Maccabees you might find in a Catholic Bible.
And the New Testament is just as unique. It includes a collection that's known as the 8 Books of Church Order, which is basically an ancient instruction manual for how to run a church. These texts cover everything from worship and doctrine to discipline, and they give the Ethiopian New Testament its very distinctive character.
So all of this brings us to the core reason for the Ethiopian Bible's massive size. And it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a philosophical choice, a deep tradition of inclusion rather than exclusion. Remember all that debate and disagreement we talked about among the early church fathers? While other Christian traditions eventually settled on smaller lists by kicking out the controversial books, the Ethiopian church took a totally different path. Its whole approach was to create a kind of comprehensive library of sacred texts, embracing works that other traditions had decided to set aside.
And this quote from Enke Wanger's research, man, it just says it all.
The Ethiopian canon essentially became a greatest hits album of all the different canons that were being debated in the early church. If an influential council or a respected church father thought a book was holy, it was very likely going to find a home in Ethiopia's Bible.
And that right there is our key takeaway. The Ethiopian Bible isn't some fixed artifact locked away in the distant past. No, it's a living testament to its own history, a history defined by a broad, generous, inclusive view of what can be considered sacred scripture. Its size and its complexity, that's a feature, not a bug.
And so we're left with this really fascinating question to think about. The Ethiopian canon challenges our whole idea of a finished holy book. And it makes you wonder, what if sacred texts aren't meant to be locked in stone forever, but to remain these living, breathing collections, shaped by centuries and centuries of faith?